Okay.
There we go.
We're good.
502? Chapter 27, page 502.
Act 1. Action.
Yeah, you're going to miss all this. All right.
He smiled.
The petals here are to attract pollinators, like a bee. And one reason why pollinators are attracted is because at the base of the petals, there's nectar is produced. And nectar is a sugary substance that insects and such like to eat. This doesn't have to be insects. Bats can be pollinators, birds. Even the wind can act to pollinate. But a bee will come up trying to get a nice drink of nectar. And as it's crawling around on these petals, getting its nectar, its back will rub up against these anthers. The anther here is what produces the pollen. The pollen are like sperm cells for plants. Actually, they're containers that hold the sperm. The sperm is held inside the pollen grain. Yes?
Okay, this is a weird question. How exactly would a plant evolve to have nectar on it? If it's just, isn't it just to attract stuff?
Yeah, well, these plants evolved from conifers who spread their pollen by the wind. But if you could attract a pollinator, let's say there was something in the cone that was edible, and an insect comes up to it and then gets the pollen on his back and then goes to another plant to eat there, then it's delivering the pollen for you. And it's smart enough to go from one to the other. So if you evolve something good tasting near your cone, then you're going to reproduce better than the next plant over.
Yeah, but how would that happen though? That just seems kind of
A
random.
mutation that produced something that happened to taste good.
Glucose,
Yeah, absolutely.
Just seems kind of-
Leaked out some glucose, and then all of a sudden you have pollinators there transporting your pollen. So yeah, it might happen over millions of years. So the bee is jumping around eating, and it happens to get pollen from the anther on its back. And bees are fuzzy. They've evolved fuzz to help the pollen stick to them. We find that flowering plants and insects co-evolve, and both become very widespread on the Earth at around the same time period, about 300 million years ago. And so these are the male parts. All these things on the outside, those are the male parts of the flower. The female part is in the middle. The stigma on the top, the style going down here, and the ovary at the bottom. And that in the middle is called the ovule. And that's where the egg is kept. Egg or eggs. This is all on page 502. And so you can imagine a bee landing here, trying to eat nectar. It doesn't know any better. It gets pollen on its back. It flies over to the next flower it sees, maybe on another plant, lands on it, trying to eat more nectar, and some of the pollen brushes off the bee onto this sticky stigma right here and sticks to it.
Where's the nectar?
Does it have to be from the same
The
plant?
nectar is usually located at the base of the petals.
Does it have to be from the same plant? If the pollen?
No, it's usually from a different plant. It's a way for pollen to spread from one plant to another.
Do bees know they're doing this?
No, they're just eating.
So they have no idea.
They have no idea they're being used by the plant.
Is that called the carpal stigma?
The carpal is the entire female portion.
And
The stigma, the style, and the ovary are parts of the carpal.
Okay.
The stamen is the entire male organ. The anther and filament that holds it up make up the stamen.
Can you say it again? What makes it the stamen?
Right here, look. Anther, filament.
Oh, right.
So when the pollen grain lands here on the stigma, it's going to grow a tube that eats its way downward through the style here, into the ovary, and finally into the ovule, and sperm will travel through the tube and fertilize the egg here. And thus, the plant has been fertilized. The ovule right here will form into a seed. And the ovary that surrounds it will form into a fruit. Have you ever eaten fruits before?
Yes.
You're eating ovaries of plants. Ripened ovaries. Because what's going to happen after the pollination has occurred, the ovary right here is going to fill with sugars and swell up real big. And it's got the seeds, which is the ovules, inside of them, you see. And then the fruit will get heavy, and due to some plant hormones, will fall from the tree. And an animal will eat it. And the seeds are tough enough to withstand the animal's digestive organs. And then the animal craps out the seed somewhere. Probably far away from the original tree that dropped it. And thus the seed has been able to spread thanks to the animals moving around. So it's an interesting little way of life. Flowers use animals to spread their pollen, and flowers use animals to spread their seeds. And all they have to do in exchange is produce a little food reward. A little food reward brings the bees to get the pollen, and a little food reward feeds the animals to spread the seeds. Are y'all following all this?
So that's why, like fruit trees flower in the spring, and then
The flowers are gone, and then the fruit is there.
yeah,
That's right.
that makes sense.
The unparalleled success of angiosperms depends
It's
on their
bee-cam.
ability to bloom. Flowers are the plant's site for sexual reproduction. Flowers are actually modified leaves which grow from shoots stimulated by hormones. The leaf-like sepals are located outside the flower's petals, bright and fragrant. Petals often form showy patterns to attract animal pollinators.
See, the plant wants the bee to see it. That's why the flowers are so pretty and showy. It wants to attract insects. And so the bee sees it and can come up and eat, and in that time he's getting pollen on him.
Many flowers grow both male and female parts. In the male structures, a thin stalk called a filament supports an anther, which produces and stores the male gametes we find in pollen. The female reproductive parts consist of the stigma, a landing pad for pollen. The style, a tube-like connection of the stigma. And the ovary, which houses the egg-producing chambers known as ovules. Flowers vary considerably, but they've all adapted toward one purpose, to improve the odds of reproductive success.
What holds the male gametes?
The anther. And those pollen grains are produced by a process that makes them haploid. You remember the process that takes a normal diploid cell and makes it haploid?
Meiosis.
Meiosis. Meiosis produces the pollen grains in the anther. Y'all want to see the biggest flower in the world?
Yeah.
There it is.
That's also the smelliest, right?
Yeah, it is very smelly. And here's
Is it
David
like good smell
Attenborough.
or bad smell?
Very bad smell. He's visiting it in the
One of the
jungle.
most extraordinary of these insect enticers lives here in the tropical rainforest of Sumatra. It only flowers once in 1,000 days, and when the flower develops, it only lasts for 3 days, so very few people have seen it. But here it is. Technically, it's a whole group of flowers clustered around this, but you can be justified for regarding it as one flower. And if you do that, well then, this is the biggest flower in the world. It's related to the dead horse arum, but it's 9 feet tall and 3 feet across. It's Amorphophallus titanum, the Titan arum. The function of this great spike in the middle is to produce a smell, and if you smell it, it smells very strongly of bad fish. And this apparently attracts insects, which come along here and go down into this great funnel to these small flowers that grow at the base. Until this film was taken, no one was sure what insects pollinated the Titan arum. As we watched, we saw that without doubt the job was done by tiny sweat bees. Like other arums, the male flowers form a band at the top. Below them, the female flowers with long yellow-tipped stigmas. The bees seemed to find some reward on the stigmas, for they crawled all over them, distributing the pollen they brought with them. But why should the Titan arum produce the biggest bloom in the world to attract such tiny pollinators? To be effective, these bees must bring pollen from another bloom. But since the plant is rare and only flowers once in 3 years, the nearest may be miles away. It's not easy to spread perfume over such distances in the still, humid air of the rainforest. Perhaps the best way to do so is to disperse it from the top of a towering spire, like smoke from a factory chimney.
You could get that for your girlfriend or boyfriend on Valentine's Day.
I don't think so.
So is it like
It's a flower I found in the rainforest.
No, it's a
Last like 3
species.
days.
Why did that angle look so different at the end of the video?
It was shooting it from underneath.
Is that a different one?
Yeah, they're all over the
So
rainforest.
those people like have to like smell that.
Yeah,
It smells pretty bad. Here.
I've never smelled it.
When did you smell it, Isaac?
I read about it.
That's what you filmed.
Oh.
The pollen grains, like I say, they're produced by meiosis. They're microscopic. They're haploid cells. And
Wait, what are they produced by?
they're produced by the anthers. Those little anthers?
Well,
Yeah, they're produced by meiosis. Uh-huh. The process of meiosis produces them in the anthers. And they show you here of a pollen grain landing on the top of one of the stigmas here, the sticky stigma. And you can see this tube growing down. This tube growing downward. And there's sperm cells in the tube, you see. And it might take a month for this tube to grow all the way down into the ovary and penetrate the ovary. And when it does so, the sperm and egg, there's an egg in the ovary, you see. In the ovule here, there's an egg. There's the egg. And the sperm will come together with the egg. There's actually 2 sperm, though. This is something that happens with flowering plants that you don't see often in nature, but there's something called double fertilization. It's different than the way we have sex. One sperm fertilizes the egg. Another sperm fertilizes a cell in the center of the ovule that has 2 nuclei. And when that sperm fertilizes this double nucleated cell, then you have a cell that's called triploid. It has 3 nuclei in it.
What does it do? Another sperm does what?
Let me finish it.
Fertilizes it doesn't.
One sperm fertilizes the egg, and that becomes a diploid zygote that will grow into the plant. Another sperm fertilizes this polar cell in the middle, and that becomes a triploid cell. And that cell will multiply and grow into the food that is inside the seed of a plant. And so when you have a seed ends up having a coat on the outside, a seed coat, and then this zygote that's diploid, 2N, and then this food inside the seed that we call endosperm. And it actually, if you look at the nucleus, it has 3 sets of chromosomes. It's triploid. And you don't see that very often. A triploid cells. And there's many thousands of cells here. And the zygote will eat the endosperm. The zygote will get nutrition from the endosperm and kind of absorb this endosperm as it sits here in the seed. And so the zygote can live for a heck of a long time off this endosperm. And that's why a seed, you can plant it maybe even 10 years later after the seeds come out. You know, have you ever seen you buy those seeds at the store that are in the little packets? See, they got a living thing inside the seed, a little zygote, and there's endosperm. And those seeds might last for years. And you plant them years later, and if this gets wet, the seed coat will break open, and then the zygote will start growing. They found some seeds that 10,000 years old that are still viable. Right, some rice seeds in a sarcophagus.
Did they plant them?
Of course.
Yeah, they planted them in a group.
Were they different from rice today?
They were a different species of rice that's thought to be extinct.
Was it like
except
really,
for that one that they
was it like really
found
hard and
planted.
stuff?
I may have the video about that. Yeah, they were all hard and dead, but one of the seeds,
I mean, like
somehow survived.
is the rice like barely edible?
I don't think any of the rice was edible except for the one seed. They didn't try to eat it.
Yeah, but didn't rice like evolve?
The rice that, I don't know, that's a good question. You mean the rice that came from the new plant?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they were able to get that to
Just
flour or what.
Like corn, it used to be like really hard.
Yeah,
and wheat.
I don't know. That's a good question. I may not have that video.
Oh, was that a
Yeah, this shows how the seeds can be transported, you see. Sometimes the seeds grow fruit, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they grow wings instead of fruit, and they're dispersed by the wind instead of by an animal. It just depends on the particular manner in which...
How does the pineapple? That floats, right?
The pineapple isn't it edible? It's got edible fruit.
It's a bunch of fruit.
There is much less wind in the tropical rainforest. Even above the canopy, the humid air hangs as a mist, and below there is seldom even a breath in the air. If a plant is to exploit its height here, it has to give its seeds very good flying equipment indeed, and none does that better than this liana in Borneo. Aircraft designers have tried to build a wing as efficient as this one, but failed. Even the faintest updraft produced by the slightest thermal is enough to lift this little glider with its seed passenger and so extend its flight. Preceded humanity in building fixed-wing gliders, and not only gliders, they created helicopters too. sycamore seeds.
If you listen really closely, it's exactly.
The balance between the weight of the seed and the length and width of the wing is exact and perfect. A slightly heavier seed or a shorter and narrower wing, and the whole thing would fall like a stone. The tri-star plant produces a revolving seed with 6 blades, and aircraft designers have yet to copy that. Plants also use explosives. Jet propulsion. This is a squirting cucumber. And this, Himalayan balsam. Its seed capsules are pumped full of liquid to such a pressure that the slightest touch makes them explode. The force is so great that seeds can be shot away for as much as 15 feet.
Cool, cohesion. Those are little burrs on the dog's hair. Those are seeds, you see. And they travel, and the dog carries them for a while, and then shakes them off, and they land somewhere, and might grow to a new plant. Yeah, little hitchhikers, those are seeds. Sand spurs, those are
I
seeds.
find those things everywhere.
All those produced by flowering plants.
I find them like all over.
What's that?
I'm just they're dead, but they have a liquid.
They're not dead. Inside them, there's a
Inside
seed.
them. Why would you want those things to live?
The other day I like put on yoga.
The
pants.
plant wants them to live.
Like behind my knee, there's one. And I'm like,
They
Plant like evolved those methods. Of,
They've evolved those methods to use animals to spread them around. You see, so that you get the sand spur on in your foot or on your clothes or whatever, and then it falls off somewhere down the beach. It could grow into a new plant. Seeds are the way plants travel. Plants are stuck. They can't move. So if they want to get their babies far away from them where they might stand a better chance of getting nutrition, not have to compete with their parents for nutrition or sunlight or whatever, they got to spread them around somehow. So they've evolved all these manner of spreading them around. But probably the most successful is fruit that you eat and the seed able to survive in the gut.
So plants have evolved to be bad parents.
It's well to spread out their kids. Yeah.
No, they're like
Is it- that's-
They give them away.
yeah.
how do I turn this off?
If they want to go on Bozeman Biology and look at flowering plants, flowers.
Okay, now I'm like
Could be a
leaving
quiz,
video.
yeah.